So obviously with mercenaries now in the new pack, John, I guess the real question begs why so many mercenaries right now?
Yeah, so there's a couple different reasons. Thematically is what kind of drives everything for our game. So with that in mind, we're literally taking this is taking place during or right after the time of the battle begins, our initial product offering. So from a lore thematic standpoint, the Jotun and the Synthian have been at war now for a while, and they're basically getting to a point where it's opening the door to opportunity, as we talked about. If you saw in our trailer, this is the opportunity for these other, maybe not so much factions. Well, mechanically they are faction mercenaries, but they're other groups on the planet that are going to take advantage of this conflict right now. And so we thought, before, and we'll transition and talk about that here in a little bit, before we introduce other factions, we wanted to showcase that, hey, the primary feature or focus right now is the war between the Jotun and the Synthian. And now that this has been taking place and this new opportunity, with the mercenaries now on the scene, both factions are starting to see a benefit as to why they want to take advantage of these mercenaries for a variety of different reasons. That being said, it also is a nice transition because through this conflict, the Jotun and the Synthian both have discovered maybe their own personal weaknesses. And so they've identified that, one, these mercenaries help shore up some of those weaknesses, which is also a mechanical related thing. Right. But it also identifies they're starting to get news, if you will, of what's really out there in the way. Stuff that for hundreds of years the Jotun have dismissed. They've lived primarily safely in their biodomes. The Synthian never really had to worry about it before because they had been previously. They're going back to the biodomes. They're not straying too far from the established known civilizations. Right. But with these mercenaries being introduced, you're starting to realize there's a lot more out there, like way more out there. And so this allows the Jotun and the Synthian to kind of level up, if you will, to be ready for the next wave of not just thematics with lore and fiction, but mechanically.
Sure.
We have two new factions coming, so this is preparing these existing factions for those new ones coming down the road.
Yeah, so speaking of new factions, obviously we're pretty excited about where the game's going to end with those new factions. And from a standpoint of what we want to accomplish, we hope to have both of those factions shipping by the end of this year. So certainly there's going to be more stuff coming down the road. This is why we need this Kickstarter today too, right? Is to help us get this product made, give something for our fans mechanically to still play with and have a lot of diversity. In fact, introducing the bulk of this as mercenaries means that from a deck building perspective, the sky really does become the limit here. There's so many different ways. You can play a pure Jotun build now. You can play Jotun sites with pure mercenary combatant builds. You've got all kinds of opportunity to really explore new space that our fans and our backers and our players didn't get just in the battle kit with 3 mercenary cards to work with, right? So now the meta changes so drastically with this pack, and it's just 14 cards. And in terms of the unique number of cards, obviously the pack is going to end up being 56 cards total because everybody always gets complete playsets in our game. But so speaking of those new factions and what we're trying to accomplish, this is going to kind of dive into that high-end design a little bit. But ultimately, what we wanted to bring to the table was something totally new and something totally different. And it's been in the works, not new. We started out with these 4 factions in mind due to the indie nature of our business. We had to scale back in order to be able to bring something to market, and that's what the Battle of the Game represents, is that scaling back. We're ready to lift the veil off of those other 2 factions and get you excited about them. We hope to be maybe previewing some of those at Origins. So if you're coming to Origins this year, be sure to stop by the Punch booth and take a look at some of the preview stuff we have there. But ultimately, the first one we're going to bring to market is the Xolarians.
That's right.
And they're different.
They are. They're the first wave of what the Jotun and Synthian stumble upon as they go out further into the waste. The more they encroach into that space, the more that space encroaches back on them. So the Xolarians, if you follow our lore, you'll realize that some of them are exiled literally from the Jotun, as well as survivors of the original fracture. So there's a combination of Jotun survivors, existing survivors. They've been out there for almost 800, 900 years now. They've taken a completely different course. just because they may have had a connection to the Jotun as far as how they play, completely different play style.
Right.
Some are mutants, some are not, some are cybernetically enhanced. It has kind of also a Western flavor too, if you will. So if you're a fan of properties like Mad Max, kind of that,
for sure.
this is the faction that's very true to the post-apocalyptic vibe.
That's right.
It's lots of variation in appearance, lots of variation in play style. Mechanically speaking, though, and I'll let Jesse elaborate on this, they're more of a kind of a control or counter faction. They've learned to adapt by any means necessary, so they're the most suited to respond to what the other player does.
Yeah, so when we set out to design the Sularia, one of the first things we talked a lot about was what would a faction that has survived almost a millennia in a place that really wasn't fostering life, what would make them work? And at the core of their values, they're survivors. They've learned how to survive at all costs, which means they're not always even loyal to themselves in that respect. They don't necessarily adhere to a faction loyalty, and because of that, you'll see a lot of different kind of elements at work within their faction, and so some would say that would lead to discontinuity, but quite the contrary, when they become motivated on a certain task, they become very motivated on a certain task. And so, John mentioned control and counter mechanics. Obviously, that's going to be a huge component of their design. They don't want their opponents to survive in the waste like them, so they make sure that they don't have the tools necessary to do that. And so there's a lot of different things going on. I won't spoil all of the fun of what mechanics are to come. We'll definitely talk about those more in the future in our previews, and then that they're definitely bringing a whole new way to play the game that doesn't have anything necessarily even to do with combat. I think that pretty much covers the Solarians, but there's a much greater terror coming from the waste, right?
Right, and that's, if you're a real fan of our fiction, one of the early articles kind of touched upon this particular faction, and that's the Bertoan. When Animus Vox and Novum Sparrow were out in the waste, they didn't always like to relay some of the things that they were discovering, right? Out while they were out on their mining runs. So that being said, the Bertoan are our fourth or fifth, depending on if you include
the mercenaries.
They're our fourth core faction. So they're basically the planet's. Originally, they're the planet's response mechanism, if you will. So we mentioned in the past, in the fiction, there were a number of corporations on the planet. It was kind of like our planet is now, Earth. But Sularia had a number of different civilizations, a number of different cultures and corporations, and a lot of different technologies. And there was one particular group in particular exploring bioweaponry. And basically, they were doing experimentations on the existing wildlife. And it happened at the same time the fracture more or less occurred. Their facilities were basically buried, and these are large, not quite maybe to the scale as the biodomes from the Jotun were building, but they were these really large underground complexes where they were doing these testings on various wildlife. And ultimately, they survived. They evolved, and unbeknownst to the Solarians, just looking for something to survive on, the Solarians actually were the ones that made first contact. They stumbled upon some of these old underground facilities and essentially released these organisms onto the planet. Accidentally, not intentional, it's just pure accident. So with that evolution in mind, they're kind of like the planet's now defense mechanism. They're literally designed to purge human life, if you will.
Just all life that's
not them. And in fact, they actually will feed on themselves if necessary.
Sure. So that kind of talks a little bit mechanically about what the Bertoans are bringing to the table. And again, we set out to this when we were talking about these in the early days of design for Battle for Sularia. We said, what's going to make this faction, say, different than the Jotun, the Scythian, and in this case also the Solarian.
Right.
And ultimately we landed on, what would, if nature had a way to evolve and become intelligent, how would it behave? Would it still be primal? Would it become sophisticated? What would it be? We landed on the theory that it would still be primal by nature. So you really do find beasts of mythological like just a myth,
Right,
beasts of myth.
right.
I mean, these things that people just can't even believe exist, and that are fearsome and ferocious and very scary for anybody of natural life to come across, because they are evolved and they're highly agile and they're highly sophisticated in their combat mechanics. But then we also found that we needed to introduce some more to them, and they reproduce a lot.
Right.
And it's always a common thing when you play against the Protoan to say, well, there was one, there's now three. So it's a really common theme throughout the design to find these spawnlings or whatever you want to call them. These just little guys that don't look so fearsome all alone,
Right.
but in mass they are very, very damaging. And then in turn, like John mentioned, they're primal. And being primal means that sometimes they get in fights amongst themselves and determine who's the alpha in their species and who's going to lead them as a hive mind. They don't kind of adhere to a single unified front either.
Yeah. So on one hand, they are from a lore standpoint, they function almost like the insect kingdom, where there is this hive motivation, but at the same time, due to the very nature of them rapidly evolving, you will see personalities develop.
Absolutely.
And so it comes down to, of these personalities within their faction, that would be, mechanically speaking, like their type 1.
For sure.
They're the ones that tend to help drive the evolutionary cycle of the different groups within the Proton.
Right. So you're going to find some of the most fearsome type 1s we've ever designed in this faction, for sure. And they're going to do some amazing things that are going to really, again, change how the game is played and how you react as a player. Because you may think you're in good shape against a Proton player, and then almost instantly that table can be turned and you're in a lot of trouble. So that kind of gives us a preview of what's to come later on this year, and why backing this Kickstarter is just as important, because without this, we can't lead into the next parts and pieces. And of course, if you look at our stretch goals, you'll see that if we make it far enough in this, we'll get those out. However, they will come later this year. So we'll ship Blood, Profit, and Glory right away. We want to get that out to you, get that into your hands, have you using those cards today or as soon as possible. And then at the end of this, we'll continue and push very rapidly in our development to make sure we get the Faction Pack Sularia and the Faction Pack Proton released. And probably if we make it in this Kickstarter, it'll be just one box instead of two. Otherwise, our plans at this time are to separate it into two separate boxes.
Yeah. That's really it for now, everyone. We're really excited about this project. We can't wait to get the rest of this out to you. But as Jesse mentioned, we're a small company and we need your help. And this is how we get there.
Yep.
So definitely support us if you can. And we're going to be doing the convention circuit again for the rest of the year. And if you get the opportunity, definitely stop by and say hi to us. We'd love to show you the game in person.
For sure, you might get some pretty cool promos for
That's
coming
right.
by and telling us you're a fan of the game. So
That's right. And thank you.
Yep, thank you.